sheer exhilaration, the power and purpose of steam just can't be matched. It doesn't take much imagination to strip away the overhead gantries and the rest of the modern trappings. Once you do, it's like a time warp. You're back 50 years, riding the rails in the golden age of steam.
Don't worry about a bit of soot. It's good for you.
This is a very rare spectacle. It's not often organisers can get permission to run 3 steam trains side by side on a public track. They're on their way to the year's major steam event, Open Day at Thirlmere, Australia's biggest rail museum. We'll catch up with the locos later on. But first, we're going to step even further back in time. In fact, back to the very dawn of Australia's railway age. Clearly enough, this railway doesn't run on steam. It's strictly 1 horsepower. Even so, it has a special claim to fame. It was Australia's first, opened in 1854. Victor Harbour Tramway in South Australia is the final link in a line built to join paddle steamer ports on the Murray River with deep water ports beyond the Murray mouth. Paddle steamers couldn't cross the Murray Bar, so they were unloaded upriver. Horse-drawn trains took the cargo overland to waiting clipper ships. Today, the only cargo is people, but business has never been better.
People don't realise that it was the first public railway in Australia. They tend to think that Melbourne or Sydney would have had the first public railway, and they're quite surprised that this one started up only months before the Melbourne one did. If you ever talk to South Australian about the Victor Harbour, they always remember the old tram from times back. This whistling drives are crazy. Here it is, it'll keep her moving. Faye, come on, mate. One more run after this. You've got Sydney with its bridge, and you've got San Francisco with its cable cars, and Victor Harbour's got its horse tram. That's what South Australians remember.
It takes a team of 5 draft horses to keep this 1 horse-drawn train on track. They're the last of a noble line. Up to the early 20th century, horses still hauled goods and people on many lines, an era long gone. But, thanks to Victor Harbour, not quite forgotten. It was in 1854 that Australia's railways first got up ahead of steam. Before long, the railway builders were facing some remarkable challenges. Here at the Zigzag in Sydney's Blue Mountains, they celebrate both the age of steam and its engineering challenge. It's only thanks to enthusiasts like Michael Forbes that this line operates at all. Michael has spent most of his adult life helping to get this particular railway back on track. When engineers started to build a railway west of Sydney back in the 1860s, they were faced with an immediate challenge. The challenge was the Great Dividing Range. West of Sydney, practically on the outskirts of the city, the range rises almost sheer to the plateau of the Blue Mountains. It took 25 years for explorers on foot to find a way through. It wasn't going to be easy to get a train across, but they did it. To climb up the plateau and to get down the other side, the engineers used an ingenious structure. It was called a zigzag. The idea was simple: to build a track in the form of a giant Z. The train comes along the top of the Z, switches back down the middle, then forward again, and on its way. We're going to start our journey at the bottom of the Z for the obvious reason that, in steam, uphill is really the only way to go. Getting down or up the Z always took a lot of shunting. That's one of the reasons the zigzag is no longer part of the main line. This stretch of track was bypassed in the early 1900s. It was over 60 years before enthusiasts began to restore the line to steam. They had to start from scratch, relaying the track and finding locos to run on it. For Michael Forbes, it also meant learning a brand new skill.
Well, I learned to drive the thing here because there aren't so many places you can learn to drive a steam train anymore. So I started off as a guard, went through fireman and got trained to drive the engines by the senior driver of the State Rail Authority, who's also a member here. So he taught me the art, and I got examined by him first, and then went into the DLI, and they give you a grilling.
But the question I must ask you, Michael, why do you do it?
Basically, it's because I want to. I'm of a generation that was brought up in awe of the engine driver. I used to watch the big 38s go past, and I thought, I'd like to drive steam engines, and that's when it started.
These days, the zigzag operates every weekend. And once the runs start, they continue to dusk. So that means breakfast on the run. From a distance, you'd never guess what was really going on. Well, maybe a slight aroma of onions wafting across the valley. They tell me breakfast on the footplate is a fine old steam tradition. Whether it is or not, I'd have to say it's a great idea. How's that sausage sandwich going, Michael?
Not too bad. Harry's Cafe to Wheel strikes again.
It's on what they call the middle road of the Z that you start to see why building the zigzag was such a challenge. This whole section had to be carved out of sheer rock. The remaining gaps were bridged with towering stone viaducts. The zigzag opened in 1869, and for the next 40 years, this is how every train got across the Blue Mountains. In its time, the zigzag was recognised as one of the engineering wonders of the world. At the top of the middle road, Michael has to shunt again. Ingenious as it was, you can see why the old zigzag had its limitations. no doubt this is one of the most spectacular steam locations in the country. Whether you're having a picnic and watching from down below, whether you're riding aboard, or whether you're up on the footplate making smoke. But Michael tells me that the best is yet to come.
This is the longest tunnel on the zigzag. You'll need to hold your breath for about 2 minutes. So here we go.
What is it about a tunnel? Watch the smiles. There's nothing quite like the effect of steam in a tunnel. A wall of sound. You don't just hear it, you feel it.
A lot of them will give up tobacco after this, Brian.
True, you do cop a bit of soot. No one really minds.
Here we go, you can breathe again.
Coming out of the tunnel, we announce ourselves with a fanfare of steam. Back into daylight, we're also close to the end of our run, the zigzag terminus at Clarence Station. Every day except Christmas, sounds of steam echo through the hills and gullies of Victoria's Dandenong Ranges. They signal the operation of Australia's best known, most popular and most successful little train. Puffing Billy was the first big success story of its kind. The restored railway began its operations in 1962 to become a landmark for Australian railway preservation. Since 1962, Puffing Billy has carried over 6 million passengers. Restored by enthusiasts and still mainly run by volunteers, the train operates a schedule as reliable and frequent as any mainline railway. This track is one of the last survivors of a whole network of Victorian narrow gauge railways. They were built to open up rich but hilly farming country. Puffing Billy is what it always has been, a community train. Both visitors to the Dandenongs and those who live here feel it belongs to them. That doesn't mean the old puffer can't be challenged. Once a year he is, with a popular fun run up the mountain. Mind you, when push comes to shove, the train has right of way. Years ago, Victoria's public railways closed Puffing Billy down. The line didn't pay. Today, enthusiasts have made it a bigger business than ever before. There must be a moral in there somewhere. Puffing Billy is a proven success story. But what's it like to be at the very start of a giant restoration project, just starting to get up its own head of steam? Well, that's what's happening here. Compared to Puffing Billy, the steam enthusiasts at Richmond Vale near Newcastle in New South Wales still have most of the job in front of them. Here they hope not only to run a railway, but to restore a whole industrial complex, a coal mine, a power station, and a line with a lot of history. The first private railways in Australia were built to link coal mines in this area as far back as 1856. They were also about the last to operate in steam. Restoration here started in 1977. There's still a long way to go. The task ahead would be daunting to any but the most dedicated. But luckily, that's the kind of person a challenge like this always seems to attract. People who think this complex represents a dimension of Australia's industrial past that just mustn't be lost.
There's really only one way to appreciate a steam locomotive, and that is in steam, in motion. A locomotive like this one that was stuffed and mounted, as they say, on a concrete block in the open or even in a museum under a roof, it just doesn't convey what the machines are all about. They are just a dead, inanimate lump of metal. But once you put a fire in them and you raise steam, and they really do come to life. They're almost a live machine.
Ernie Winter and his colleagues want to see all their locos up and running. That work will go hand in hand with restoring the mine site itself. The mine, and most of the buildings here, date back to around 1900, a time when Richmond Vale came into the hands of a remarkable man named John Brown. John Brown was a mining magnate, an entrepreneur of the old school. So John Brown's railways carried John Brown's coal from John Brown's mines to John Brown's ships.
All the buildings were built on a very grand scale, and you will see, looking around the site, that even buildings that were built over a period of 20 or 30 years are in a similar architectural style. That gives you an indication of the aim that John Brown had in mind when he built this place. The power station on site was the largest in Australia when it was built. The colliery was certainly the largest in the South Maitland coalfields, and it was the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, probably one of the largest in the world.
There are plans to restore more of this line, but work so far has reclaimed one classic stretch of track. The last uphill pinch to Richmond Vale siding is a grade of 1 in 22, about the steepest in Australia. If Richmond Vale has a mascot, it's this little tank engine, Marjorie. Milton Anderson has been driving her for over 40 years.
Well, I started driving this locomotive in 1950 and drove it for 10 years. And after that, I left the position that I had to take up another one. And some years later, I discovered this in a park at Edgeworth. In a bit of a mess. Vandals had been at it, and a chap was trying to shut the smoke box door. And he had no hope, so I explained to him the proper procedure, and he says, "Why don't you come and join us?" So that's how I become involved back in the Richmond Vale Preservation Society. They are alive. A steam locomotive will talk to you as you're going along. It's not like the modern diesels. All they do is growl. But these things, they've got a character of their own, and if you understand them and work them properly, they'll talk back to you in a language that only a driver can understand.
A future success story like Puffing Billy? One can only hope so. Richmond Vale is worth preserving. A fascinating slice of Australia's industrial past. It's the busiest day of the year at Thirlmere in New South Wales, Australia's biggest rail museum. The 3 locos we saw setting out from Sydney were all headed here. Now they're about to arrive. Thirlmere is in the Highlands south of Sydney, just far enough out of town to justify a decent run in steam. You can't spend a day here without realising what the excitement of old railways and steam itself is all about. It's the opening day of the steam season. A day for polishing and pride. A day when even the most carefully preserved old locos get just a little bit extra care and attention. As even the keenest steam enthusiast knows, he's really only here as a minder. The locos are the stars of this show. This is a day for riding on and looking at, listening to and talking about just one subject. The steam locos we never knew we valued until they were nearly lost. There's a big static display here too. It preserves a wide and remarkable range of both locos and carriage sets. An event like this leaves you in no doubt that we still love our old trains. And if we do, maybe one reason is they gave such valiant service. Iron horse isn't quite enough. Iron workhorse is closer to the truth. This Stevenson loco entered service in 1864. It was retired a century later in 1964. An Australian Railways grandfather, father and son could well have driven the same engine. Among the relics preserved here, there are reminders that our railways once met every kind of need for transport. There was a train and a carriage for every purpose. Mail not only travelled by train, it was also sorted on board. Racehorses and their strappers travelled by train. The mighty Farlap once rode in this very carriage. Convicted prisoners also travelled by train to jail. In their heyday, steam trains hauled goods of all descriptions. They could even take along a crane in case of trouble. This one's hand-operated and nicknamed Hernia. A Pullman sleeping car, vintage 1891, but not much different from the ones I remember in the 1960s. Didn't know they were so old. Wash basin here, water jug, a ladder to climb up to the top bunk. Even sitting up, a Pullman car was quite a gracious way to travel. These carriages were full of craftsmanship, as Arthur Tubby showed me.
First and second class seats. Pullman carriages were imported from America, and they're a vast improvement over the British-style carriages that were in use at the railways at that time. They're much bigger, much airier, a clerestory-type roof. We'd probably say that the glamour went out of rail travel when the diesel locomotive arrived.
Yeah. The new carriages and so on are much more streamlined, but this certainly represents glamour, doesn't it?
It does. You've got workmanship went into these carriages. You've got creature comfort, a bit of style and a bit of class, I suppose you'd call it.
And the chance to sit back for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, and make friends with your fellow human beings.
Yes, you weren't worried about how quickly you could get from Sydney to Melbourne. It was an adventure that you knew was going to take 2 or 3 days, so you sat back and enjoyed it.
The vintage days of railway.
Exactly.
The truth is, of course, as I discovered back at the Zigzag, there's really only one place to travel, on the footplate. So that's how I'm going to travel home. Well, some of the way, to Australia's heart, Alice Springs. We imported the camels, and we also imported their drivers from Baluchistan and Afghanistan. They came to be nicknamed the Gans, and they blazed a camel trail from South Australia to the centre. So, when a railway was pushed to Alice Springs in Australia's heart, naturally, it too became known as the Gan. There have been a few Gan trains. This is the latest. It's a modern train that still provides a romantic journey. Partly because of where it goes, partly because it does the trip in style. The whole vast outback rolls past your window. If you get sick of that, there's space and time to make new friends as well. When Australian National introduced the new Gan, they also built a new track for it to run on. That left the old Gan line more or less stranded. But 2 stretches of that line have been restored by enthusiasts. They run very different trains, and we're going to ride on both of them. 40 years ago, Quorn, in the foothills of the Flinders Ranges, was a busy railhead. These days, it's usually a much quieter town. The volunteers who keep this railway running mostly come from Adelaide, over 300 kilometres south. In fact, on this particular long weekend, they've come from all over Australia. In the old days, a trip on the Gan started with an overnight stop in one of Quorn's many hotels and with an early morning call. Sleepy-eyed, you struggled down to the station to start a journey that 3 days later might find you in Alice Springs. Although the first train we're going to ride on here actually never went as far as the Alice. Everywhere I've been on this journey, the eyes of old railway buffs grow moist and misty at the mention of one particular train. It starts from here. It's not the only train operated by the volunteers of the Pitchy Ritchie Railway, but it is the star of their show. They call it the coffee pot. When the coffee pot runs, and that's not often, it brings people from miles around. Built in Britain in 1905, the coffee pot is the only surviving steam rail motor of its type anywhere in the world. The coffee pot began its working life on this line, a commuter train running between what were then much busier little towns in the Flinders Ranges. Restoring it to this pristine condition took 8,000 hours of work. The coffee pot isn't the only old train that runs from Quorn. In fact, every steam weekend, the Pitchy Ritchie Preservation Society fires up a loco that couldn't be a greater contrast. Big and powerful, this W-class loco was one of the last to enter Australian service. The carriage set it pulls is actually older than the loco itself. These are original Gann cars. Now, the original old Gann was a day train. Travellers stopped overnight not only in Quorn, but at other outback towns along the way. By day, they made the best of fairly Spartan accommodation. Not that it worries anyone today. On a long, flat outback run, the steep climb through the Flinders Ranges was always what it still is, a highlight of the trip. It's just as well for today's Pitchy Ritchie Railway that the people who built this line a century ago built it to last. Mind you, I notice we're not exactly charging across. But that's probably to give us time to admire the view. Or maybe just so our driver has time to wave to fans who turn up in droves. 3 days and more than 1,000 kilometres after leaving Quorn, the old Gann reached the centre. Here, right in the heart of Australia, the Gann Preservation Society operates both sit-up and sleeping cars from the old Gann. They run on 30 kilometres of track that winds up in Alice Springs. Well, we're heading for the centre on the Gann. Alice Springs, I'm coming on the Gann. Hand me up my stockman saddle, I'm going back among the cattle. Alice Springs, here I come on the Gann. Oh, the driver up the front, he's a mighty man. And to get there Friday morning is his plan. But the old train's got some rattles, she's fought some hectic battles, so we might arrive on Sunday on the Gann. And I'm heading for the centre on the Gann. Alice Springs, I'm coming on the Gann. The Gann was never a train to maintain a tight schedule. In this harsh country, it was not unusual for the train to be stopped by sand drifts, floods, or washouts along the way. Passengers sometimes found themselves camped along the track until it could be cleared. These unscheduled stops all became part of the old Ghan legend. Another delay. The nice thing on these old trains is that in the final analysis, the timetable doesn't really matter. Let me tell you about the lady who once travelled on the old Ghan. She got on at Quorn and she kept saying to the conductor, "When do we arrive in Alice Springs? When do we arrive in Alice Springs?" He kept telling her. Finally, she came up very agitated and she said, "Look, when do we arrive in Alice Springs?" And he said, "Why do you need to know?" She said, "I'm due to have a baby." He said, "Well, madam, you shouldn't have got on if you were so close to being confined." And she said to him, "I wasn't even pregnant when I got on." So now I'm almost home. Not entirely thanks to the old Ghan, although it has brought me some of the way. And even here in Alice Springs, hundreds of kilometres from anywhere else, the steam fans are out in force. If the enthusiasts who keep these old railways running deserve a reward, and they certainly do, I think they get it every time they take their trains out on the track. As I said at the start of our journey, most of these old railways don't really take us anywhere at all, except back to the past. But when it comes to trains, maybe the past is where we'd like to travel.